Hello beautiful people. In this video we're going to talk about the very topical topic of influencer marketing. But let's start a little bit with some theory here on what does the research actually tell us about influencer marketing and online consumer reviews in particular. So we know that online consumer reviews can be influential and also persuasive in terms of driving purchase intentions in consumers, and of course as a result of that marketers would like to incentivize consumers to write reviews. Now in general you've got to be careful doing that because many platforms will say that it's not allowed, like Amazon for example says that it's not allowed to incentivize and pay customers to write reviews, so you've got to be careful. So these sponsored posts tend to be more elaborative and evaluative in terms of the content they produce because people are being paid to produce it. But at the same time, research shows that it's perceived to be less helpful than a general organic review. And that, of course, opens up the question, should the influencer reveal that they have been sponsored to write this post? And more about that a little bit later. But other research shows that the platform type also impacts the level of online engagement, such as posting comments or liking a brand and so forth. And so this other article by Hughes and colleagues in 2019 found that influencer expertise, so when you perceive an influencer to be an expert, then that may work really well in a blog, but it doesn't work the same way on social media, and it fails to drive engagement on Facebook. That's what they're arguing. So you got to be careful then using influencers on Facebook. But let's move on and see what some industry sources tells us about influencers. So here's a definition of influencer marketing from HubSpot. So as you can see, it has to do with creating content, improve brand awareness, increase traffic, and drive your brand's message to a target audience. Of course, this influencer marketer is already creating content and have already established relationships with your potential target audience, and for that reason it seems really attractive that you can reach a broader audience by going via someone that already has a relationship with people that you want to target. So that's some of the reasons why using influencers is so attractive these days. Now here we also see some of the powers of influencer marketing. So here are some statistics collected again by HubSpot, just arguing that 80% of marketers says that influencer marketing is effective, and they argue that 49% of consumers today depend on influencer recommendations for their purchase decisions. And we also see that if you look at what people are searching for at Google, we can see a 1,500% increase in the term influencer marketing over the last few years. So it's a big area in marketing these days, and it seems to be favored both by consumers and marketers alike. So let's look at some different types of influencer marketers. First, we have the micro-influencer, and that's one that definitely shouldn't be overlooked. So a micro-influencer will have relatively few followers. We're talking about thousands or perhaps tens of thousands followers, but definitely not millions. So a micro-influencer will be operating in a niche and have a number of niche followers that are particularly interested in the type of things, in the type of industry that particular micro influencer operate in. So that could be a very useful type of influencer to use because it's niche based and it's focused on the particular sort of product category that you operate in. Other types are, of course, the celebrity influencer. So for a celebrity, you will have a broader range of people. So we're talking about followers in typically in the millions. So you may pay more for each level of engagement you get from a celebrity, but you may also get less out of it because there's many more followers, but the celebrity may not be that much of a have that same level of cultural capital as an expert as a micro influencer may have. So it's reaching more potential customers with perhaps less of a message. Blog influencers also quite important. Bloggers are still driving loads of content in digital marketing, and connecting with someone who writes a blog is a great idea. You may be allowed to write a guest post of someone's blog, for example, or otherwise get a blogger to write about your product. It takes a lot of time and effort to build up a large number of followers, and get someone to write a blog post about your brand that's already has thousands or millions of followers is a very good idea and can have good outcomes. Social media influencers are similar to bloggers, only that they are more specialized on a specific type of platform, such as, for example, Instagram is a big one there, but also on YouTube and Twitter. So they are more specialized on particular platforms, worth considering depending on what platform your customers may be on. And at the end, we also have key opinion leaders, which are more related to people that have a high level of expertise within a specific category. For those of you that are new to influencer marketing, you may ask the question, so where do I find these people? And it's actually not as difficult as you may think. The reason why you may think that, where do I find them, is probably because you haven't looked for them yet. But keep in mind that influencer marketers, that's, for many of them, is what they do for a living. So it's in their absolute best interest. They want to be found. They want to be found by people like you. They want to promote their brands. So it shouldn't be difficult to find them. And if it is, then perhaps they are not the best influencer marketer. A simple Google search will do. Otherwise, looking at social media, most influencer marketers will have a whole suite of social media platforms. Even if they are bloggers, for example, they can probably be found on social media as well. Otherwise, it's the traditional ways of going through referrals, searching to blogs, especially if you're looking for a blogger as an influencer. Another way is to find them through influencer software, and it's good to use these strategies. Looking for them in tandem here, because the influencer softwares will have rankings and ratings of influencers based on how good they are. Examples could be like BuzzStream or BuzzSumo are some of the more popular ones. You go on to those platforms, and you can then compare and see how different influencers have performed in the past. Some can also be found through talent agencies or various types of influencer agents. So now that you've found your influencer, then the question is, to what extent should the influencer disclose that the content that they produce is sponsored and is coming from you? Now, the research in this area is really just emerging. So when you disclose, so that it's when you disclose, some early research was saying that that evokes a sort of level of counter arguing in consumers, and that then develops. So when you read content that is disclosed that it's sponsored, then you start reading things in a much more critical way, and you start making counter arguments in your brain that says that probably like this blogger doesn't think this, doesn't think that, and that decreases the persuasiveness of the message overall. And then some other research would say, but what about if I disclose and say, well, this is a sponsored post, but the opinions are my own. So that's what they refer to as honest opinions. and that can, some research suggests, eliminate that level of resistance. Well, then again, some newer research says that it may also increase suspicion about the reviewer's ulterior motives, especially if that post is positive. So when the content is positive, we write positively, even if it's sponsored and disclosed, people may think that, did I really just want the free stuff after all, or getting paid for doing this? So I think the jury is still out, and more research, more work is needed here. But nevertheless, it is in the blogger's best interest to disclose, because the conflict of interest disclosures does increase the trust in the blogger. So even though people may perceive ulterior motives, if a review is positive about a brand, it does increase the trust in the blogger or in the influencer overall. So I'd say, in sum, you should disclose, even though it may lead to some consumers questioning the ulterior motives. So here's some further advice as well for how to create your influencer strategy. So I think you'll see from this slide that this way of working, of creating a strategy, is not just how to create an influencer strategy, but it's how to create a digital or marketing strategy overall as well. So you start, of course, always with determining what you're trying to achieve in your campaign goals, and they should be SMART goals. So I'll talk about SMART goals in another video as well. It's very, very important. You got to be able to measure your results properly. Then you define your campaign audience. You set up a budget for how much you can spend on an influencer, and then you can go ahead and choose your influencer and review the work that they've done before. So then once you've then found your influencer, you can then develop your message for your influencer. I disagree a little bit with HubSpot on that particular point. I would rather say develop your campaign message with your influencer and not for them. If you do it for them, it can come out as being very contrived, and as such, you go in with the skepticism and the problems that research show that people perceive when they see sponsored content, as I talked about before. So you then finalize the expectations with your influencer, pay them, and then measure the results. That's it. And finally, today, here are some of the trends and changes in influencer marketing that HubSpot has recently identified. And the first one is that they think that micro-influencers will have a greater impact and will become more prominent. And they're not the only ones that say that. There's plenty of marketing gurus and experts that argue these days that the micro-influencers will become more, or is becoming more important. Perhaps one of the reasons for that is because they quite often operate in a niche and they have particular expertise within a particular area, and that makes them more trustworthy than those that have a more broad appeal. The second trend is that influencer activities will extend beyond Instagram. Influencer marketing is really big on Instagram at the moment, but other platforms are coming up, such as YouTube or TikTok or Snapchat, to mention a few. And I challenge you to, even though Instagram is still driving it and it's still sort of big business, good marketing is always a matter of disruption as well. People pay attention when something is disrupted. Think Seth Godin's Purple Cow. More about that in a later week. But it's more difficult to disrupt in a cluttered environment. So if you can create an influencer strategy somewhere else than where everyone else is, then that's potentially a good idea. Regulations for influencers is becoming stricter. So what you can get away with producing content that's paid for and sponsored without disclosing the relationship between the influencer and the marketer. Those regulations is becoming stricter, but a good ethical marketer wouldn't stretch and bend the rules anyway. Employees and customers will become influencers, so that's sort of moving on from micro to perhaps nano influencers that are even sort of smaller in scope. So it's almost at the level where you're just you take your regular word of mouth and putting that into a structure and a plan, in a sense. And businesses will more invest in long-term relationships as opposed to one-off campaigns. So establishing more long-running relationships with influencers is another trend that's coming, which just also tells you that this is becoming more important. If people are just going for one-off campaigns, then they're sort of just dipping their toes in and testing the waters. But that's not what's going on at the moment. So I hope that helps you, and that if you consider using influencer in your assignment 1, then you will have the information you need to do it from these slides. Or perhaps if you're doing option 2, you may want to be the influencer, and also you should from these slides be able to then do an implementation where you're becoming the influencer. Good luck with it.